Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. Matthew Dickerson. Tech Talk. Sit back and relax. It's time to talk technology.
Hello, movers and shakers. It's time to slow down just enough to lend an ear while we bring you news from the future. It's time for Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. And in the show today, we're all about the big changes to how the world works. EV or combustion engine? We may be just about to find out which is superior on the racetrack, folks. Stay tuned for that little arm wrestle. But we've got more on driverless trains, self-healing paintwork, underwater drones, and AI predicting outcomes in sport. Ladies and gents, we have it all for you right here at Tech Talk. And here, bursting out of his skin with all the news, it's Matthew Dickerson himself. How are you, Matt?
I'm really good, but I'm actually going to talk about something that's a bit downbeat for once. Apple are very good at launching anything.
Yeah, right.
They're
the hype merchants.
They are, absolutely, and they are good at marketing. It doesn't matter what it is. They don't need to spend a lot of money on marketing because people just talk about Apple products. But recently we saw the new iPhone 16 range out, and I didn't see news articles about people camping out for 3 days waiting for the new iPhone, being the first one to get the new iPhone outside the Apple store.
Was there like one or two people camping out, and then they realised, why are we bothering? Because we're the only two people in this line.
Probably there was no one camping out because no one else is here. I'm not going to go and camp out, and I'll just walk in tomorrow morning and I'll be the first one to buy one anyway if I just turn up when the store opens. It just seems to have lost it. Now, I don't know why. Maybe it's because the features aren't as compelling as they used to be. Maybe Apple's losing a little bit of its luster. Maybe it's not quite as trendy anymore to have that latest iPhone.
Yeah, have we just hit a ceiling of ideas?
Oh, that's a possibility too. I don't want to say that because we talk so much about so many things happening, so many new things happening, but it's just not the same as it used to be. That used to be major news across every news network was people lined up outside with
the big thing was the touch screens and, you know, the having iPads, you know, they were big news back in the day, weren't they?
They were.
And things got thinner and thinner, and so we couldn't believe how thin things were getting. There was stuff to get excited about, but now we
must have features. That's the whole thing with all of these products. So I don't know whether the ideas are just drying up or whether people are going, you know what, I just don't want to line up with a tent.
My iPhone 15 is actually doing me fine.
It's not too bad, that's right. Or whether or not there's just so many ways to access the products now. You don't really need to line up anymore. You can pre-order it and it'll turn up in the post in the same morning. I mean, there's some sort of excitement about lining up with another bunch of nerds, having your urine bottles there at the ready just to make sure you don't leave the line so someone doesn't steal you. All that excitement. You know, it's just all
stories you want to share with your grandkids.
That's right, yeah. I remember the time we lined up for 3 days. How'd you go to the toilet, Grandpa? Don't talk about it. So I don't know. And Android or Samsung with Android phones, for example, or even Google with Pixels, they never seem to create that same hype.
No, that's right.
That Apple did.
Apple's got this phenomenon about it.
Yeah. Now, how much has the passing of Steve Jobs had an impact on the company? Some people will say that a dramatic impact. Maybe Steve was one of the reasons people got so hyped up about products. Maybe it's not the same with Tim Cook there, but maybe we are just drying up with ideas. And I don't want to say that because I want new ideas. I want new exciting features.
No, it'll just put more pressure on them for next year, I'm sure.
Yeah, good.
The
I
iPhone
like
17 is going to be something else.
Yeah, that's right. It all started when they didn't skip the 13. They should have skipped the 13, James. I don't know why they went from iPhone 12 to 13. They should have gone to 14 straight away.
All right, folks, let's tear this box open with our first story. Now, it was only ever going to be a matter of time. While solar cells are excellent at turning the free gift from the sun into electricity, the actual source doesn't have to be the sun at all. Any light with frequencies in the right zone can do it. So it was only going to be a matter of time before photovoltaic cells would be developed for indoor use as well. Matt, all those wasted photons filling our rooms each night from ceiling lights can be put to good use at last.
They could be put to good use.
Wasted photons all around us right now.
There was a wonderful comedy skit back from the 70s or 80s where the person doing the comedy skit said, I'm worried about the remotes. I press the button on my remote, these new remotes that were coming out now, and then they're bouncing around the room. Where do they go? It was one of those things that you just thought, well, that's a really good point they've got there.
And a conspiracy theory was born.
Exactly right. It was meant to be a comedy skit. Now it's a conspiracy theory. One of the things that I remember from school was that some of the rich kids, and I wasn't one of these kids, had a calculator that had a couple of little solar panels across the top.
I remember that.
And you could take it into the sun and it would turn the calculator on. And I went, wow. And you'd cover it up and it would turn off again. How cool is that?
For a little while, that kid with that calculator was showing off and everyone was impressed.
Everyone,
for
I was
little
impressed.
while.
That's right. I was impressed until you realise that when you needed the calculator, it was in the classroom when it didn't work, or that kid had to sit next to the windows to be able to get the sun coming through the windows. This is much better than that. This is by an Australian startup, and I love when we've got technology stories with Australian startups or Australian companies in general, and hopefully it stays in this country, but so often they end up overseas. But this is an Australian startup based out of Wagga Wagga, and they've got flexible photovoltaic cells that can use light inside our houses, LED lights, halogen globes, etc., to actually power or generate electricity. What they're doing with this is they're saying we should get away from disposable batteries. Disposable batteries in our remote controls, disposable batteries in our small, low-power devices.
Yeah, these low-power devices that don't need much.
They don't need much. You put them in there, they last a couple of years, or they don't, they leak, and then you go to use that thing a couple of years later and it's got all this stuff that's leaked through it.
Yeah.
So you then might throw the device out as well, but you're putting these things in the bin, they go into landfill. Not great in a whole range of areas.
Not at all.
So they've said, what about if we just use some photovoltaics that would work inside the home for things that don't need much power? So again, TV remote, you don't have any batteries in it. It's got a strip of these little photovoltaics on there. You don't need much power each time you hit the button and send those remotes out there in the big wide world. And then a third thing, the only issue I can see is that sometimes I'm watching the TV in the dark. So then I'd want to change channel and I'd have to turn the light on to change the channel to then turn the light back off.
Could you just hold the remote towards the TV for a little while?
Well, you could possibly do that. Or maybe they'll have something resembling a battery, maybe some type of capacitor inside them that maybe holds a bit of charge for a little while.
Yeah.
Not like a battery that's kind of charged up or a rechargeable battery, but I'm sure they'll cover that problem. The main thing here is that using lights inside will be okay to be able to power some low-power devices, even headphones, that type of thing. So we've got lots of devices we use around the home that don't need much power.
And but the thing that gets me is that this has opened up a whole new possibility. So it starts off with the lower-powered stuff. And then some clever cookie goes, well, imagine if we could start to get the slightly more higher-powered stuff charged with photovoltaics. And so it adds an extra incentive to develop technology a little bit further. I'm excited by this.
Yeah, and I started thinking whether it might be a great way to charge mobile phones, but I just think the amount of power you'd need at this stage might be too much. In other words, you'd leave your phone sitting inside all day and it would add 1% charge for the day, but you'd use 30% charge.
I wonder if you could get one of those power packs to just charge up. Well, there's something that might take a long time to charge to full, but you don't use it all the time. And so that's just sitting there waiting and just absorbing your lounge room lights.
And then you might grab that once a week or once every couple of weeks.
Once a month even. Yeah.
Yep, so something like that. The other thing that's quite interesting about this is we've talked before about the efficiency, the maximum efficiency of photovoltaic cells on rooftops or in large solar farms. And we talk about the low to mid-20s, so 22, maybe 25%. With this type of technology, they're talking about doing a hybrid model with traditional photovoltaics and this new type of photovoltaic and being able to get maybe 40%.
Wow.
So the University of Sydney is working on a Perovskite silicon tandem cell where they believe they'll be able to get 40% efficiency out of it. So great.
I told
indoors.
you it's going to happen.
There you go, already,
yeah.
Just in one conversation. So I'm just keen to see some of these roll out. So this particular company in Wagga is manufacturing the cells. They're not going to manufacture any of the devices that use them. They're saying, here you go, manufacturers that want them, here are the cells ready to go. You want to come and use them, then jump on board. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, take my hat off to them. Apple's new AirPods are set to be a game changer on the wearables market. They'll double as hearing aids, no less, and it's all as easy as a download, apparently. Matt, you can finally get rid of that 19th century hearing trumpet once and for all.
You mean I'd have to roll up the newspaper
What's that
and
you
just
said?
make a cone out of it and try and hear what people are saying? Hearing loss is something that about 1.5 billion people across the world suffer from. Not necessarily complete loss, different levels of hearing loss. Most of those people don't do anything about it except say, what did you say? there's a bit of a stigma attached with it for some people. They've got this device that's maybe on the outside of their ear, which people look at, or they talk to you funny because you've got a hearing aid on. There might be the cost for some people. It might even be just access to an audiologist to be able to get the testing done, to get the right hearing aid, and then away you go.
So what you're saying is we need a lazy option.
A lazy option. A lazy, cheap, convenient option is always a good solution if you can't get the best solution. And I've talked to people that have had hearing aids, and some of the technology in a modern hearing aid is incredible. I spoke to one gentleman one day, and he talked to me about the 3 different settings he had on his hearing aid. He could change it with his phone or physically on the device, depending on what environment he was in. If it was a one-on-one environment, he'd change the setting. If it was a crowded environment, he'd change the setting to a different setting. If he was just out walking around, it was a different setting again. So they're very clever at what they do. But again, you've got to go through the process, and you've got to get it fitted, and you've got to get it tuned to your hearing predicament. Whereas Apple said, yeah, we need the lazy, convenient, cheaper option or convenient option. What can we do about that? So they've actually just got FDA approval for hearing aid software to link into their AirPods Pro 2 AirPods. So you put the device in your ear, you go to the software on your phone, and you run some tests. 5 minutes. That's not too bad. That's better than going down to an audiologist and making an appointment and spending an hour there. After that 5-minute test, put your phone away, your AirPods are now ready to go as hearing aids. Wow. They're not going to be as good. They're not going to be as good as a professional, fitted and expensive hearing aid, but they're going to be better than nothing.
Well, I see that at petrol stations, you can buy reading glasses. Yep. And it's not going to be as good as, say, a prescription that you would get through an optometrist, but it'll get you out of trouble.
Get you out of trouble. And that's exactly the point here. It might even get you to the point where you say, oh, actually, this is a bit easier with these AirPods, and I might actually go and get a proper hearing test done and then see where I go from there. The other thing I thought about it was this whole stigma attached to some type of medical device. You see teenage kids riding around their skateboards, listening to K-pop, good on them, but you don't think, oh, no, that person must have a hearing problem. You just go, there's a hip, young, trendy dude. Yeah. Maybe when you see your 70-year-old grandpa with AirPods in, you don't think hearing loss, you think, wow, my grandpa is so hip. He walks around everywhere, even in the house talking to grandma with AirPods on. Wow, how cool is that? So again, I think that stigma would be less because you don't think much of someone walking around with AirPods. It is a bit confusing, I must admit, when you're walking down the supermarket and you see someone you know and you say, "G'day, James, how you going?" And they talk, but they're having a different conversation and you realise they're talking on the phone to someone because they've got their AirPods in. And sometimes the worst one is on one AirPod. So you don't see that side of the head. "G'day, James, how you going?" "Yes, no, definitely. We'll go silver with that." "Really, James? What are you talking about?" Until finally you realise they're on the phone. So that might be interesting for people, but I just love the idea that we're taking normal devices we're becoming more accustomed to and using them in different ways. But also I love the fact that I've just talked about the lack of hype with the iPhone 16, but Apple are very good at saying, there's a market there, 1.5 billion people. Maybe we could sell more. Now, they already sell about 80 million pairs of AirPods per year. Wow. So they've got a reasonable market there, but knowing Apple, well, why would we only sell 80 million? If we could sell 1.5 billion, let's go for that market. I'm interested to see. I haven't tested it out. I haven't actually gone through and done the testing yet. The software is still being developed before it's in its final release. But I just love the idea that we're getting more and more focused on health tech.
Yeah. Okay, folks, the gloves are off. It's the first real tussle between ICE and EV cars. A high-octane / high-voltage showdown, and it's not going to be for the faint-hearted. Matt, let the marketing begin. EVs versus combustion engines. Now,
can we just coin something a little bit new, potentially new here? We call electric vehicles EVs, so can I call internal combustion engine vehicles ICEVs?
ICEVs?
ICEVs.
Let's start it.
Because it just makes sense. We say ICE cars, we say internal combustion cars, and we say EVs. Just stick the V on the end of ICE and we've got ICEV and EV. It just makes so much sense.
EV. Yeah, but
it doesn't roll off the tongue?
Doesn't roll off the tongue. My problem is that ICEV's got the EV in it as well, and that's confusing for me.
Oh, it could be too. Internal combustion engine vehicle and electric vehicle. Oh, no. Okay, can that idea. We'll go with something new. So Rallycross is crazy. If ever you watch a Rallycross, and I'd encourage people to do it, it's got a bit of bitumen, It's got a bit of dirt. It's got alternative tracks you can go around on your loop, and they make it a track. So it's not like good old-fashioned rally driving where if you want to watch a rally event, you'd stand on one part of the track and you'd see every car go past once at a very fast speed.
Generally in the air.
That's right. And you go, wow, that was cool. And then, okay, I guess we'll turn up tomorrow at another part of the track. The Rallycross concept is get spectators involved, get them around a track like a normal racetrack, and they do loops of that track. But they've got a few little things that thrown in to make it a bit more interesting. And this is the latest thing they're throwing in to make it incredibly interesting. Having an ICEV, I can't say anymore, having an internal bus.
Go with it. Let's do it.
Okay, right. Having an ICEV versus an EV in the same race with basically all bets are off. So you've got specific areas where you've got to be able to develop those cars. So you've got engine size limits and motor limits in terms of the EVs, but basically so they can compete evenly. The internal combustion engine vehicles are lighter, but their acceleration is not quite as good as the EVs. So I watched one little demo race they were doing, and off the starting line, the EVs just killed the petrol cars. They're just all that torque from zero, they just flew off the starting line. So they were ahead by 3 or 4 car lengths by the time they got to the first corner. But the actual ICEVs are about 160 kilograms lighter. So their cornering was a little bit better. They're a little more nimble around the corners. So it was a classic case of you've got a distinct advantage in one area, down the straights. You've got a distinct advantage in the other area, in the cornering. Who's going to come out in front?
Come back to the drivers.
Come back to the drivers, potentially, or maybe different tracks, for example. So some tracks might favour one type of car rather than the other. But I love the fact that we're saying, why not put them in together? Why not just make the regulations so they're as even as possible? And the thing that's great about it is that some people still, I'm not sure why, but still have this image of an electric vehicle as something that's like their golf buggy they drive around the golf course. It's governed to 10 kilometres an hour. You can walk along as fast as it. It doesn't throw you off the back.
Some very interesting questions about those.
Yep. It doesn't throw you off the back when you put the foot in the accelerator. And so they think that's what an electric vehicle is like. Of course, anyone that's driven one or been in one knows that it's dramatically different when you go to a real EV. So I think this will be really good for people that have watched Rallycross. They look at it and they go, those cars are fast. And EVs are competing evenly with these. That's just crazy. And I saw some interviews with some people around the track that are looking at some of these test races and just getting their thoughts of them. And one person made an interesting comment, I thought, that they love the idea that EVs are racing, but when they've been to EV-only races, the noise wasn't there. They didn't feel like it was real racing because it was too quiet. At least in this race, you've got about half the field petrol, you've got about half the field EV. So there's still noise there, even though only half the cars are making a noise, but they love the fact there's still noise around the track.
So we've got to wait a generation for just pure EV racing, is what you're saying?
Maybe.
People who grew up without the noise.
Or maybe people that get the hearing loss need the AirPods and they say, let's go.
They can have whatever sound they want then.
That's right. That's it. So I do love the concept. I'd love to see the concept in Formula E versus Formula One. At the moment, a Formula One car in its current specification would be faster than Formula E, but that's really down to specifications. It's really down to what they line up. But again, people that love their Formula One would see a Formula E car as somewhat inferior, but there's no reason it can't be matching a Formula One car, and then it's up to the teams to decide which way they want to go. So, yeah, very exciting. I just think
very
the concept
exciting.
is great.
A good friend in the drone business once told me that the trickiest thing about designing underwater robots is that if you want to have any level of control, any wireless contact after about 50 centimetres below the surface is pretty much redundant. That was, of course, back in the days before AI was really taking hold. And Matt, people are starting to find uses for underwater drones now.
Underwater drones, and of course that would make sense because we've talked about this a little bit, things that stop or block electromagnetic signals, and water is very good
at
blocking electromagnetic signals. In fact, when people live in a wooded area and they lose mobile phone reception, they assume it's the trees that are blocking the signal, but it's mostly the water in the trees that's blocking the signal.
Right.
So when you've got trees that hold their water particularly well, they're better at blocking signal than trees, because timber itself doesn't really block much. If you have a block of dry wood, it doesn't block much signal, but a living tree that's full of moisture does block signal.
And I wonder if the transpiration from the leaves, anyway, we're digressing here, but
that'd be unusual for us.
But yeah, so underwater drones now.
Underwater drones, that's right. So a big issue is keeping the hull of your ocean-going vessel clean.
Barnacle free.
Barnacle free, that's exactly right. You get lots of stuff that likes to attach to it, algae, microorganisms, various biofouling. So they can cost you about 17% extra in fuel if you're saying, who cares, we'll just leave them all on there because that's all that extra resistance as it's trying to slice through the
Less
water.
streamlined, yeah.
You also get a bit of an issue, which probably is not as much of an issue, but potential issue when you start taking some organisms from one part of the ocean to another part of the ocean. It might be to an area where maybe they've got no natural predators. They might cause some changes in the ecosystem underwater. So keeping your hull clean is a big issue.
Well, the crown of thorns starfish is an excellent case of that, but again, we're going to digress if we go into it.
Yeah, but it's an issue, definitely an issue.
The ballast water and whatnot.
Normally, if you own a big ship and you want to keep the hull clean, you get into a port at various locations and maybe once a month or so, you hire a team of 20 divers, typically for a reasonable sized ship, and you sit back there and wait for them to go underwater and scrub the hull clean.
Wow.
Doesn't sound like that exciting a job, and also sounds like it's expensive because 20 people costs a lot of money to hire them.
Sure.
So this is another Australian startup, which is great, a Sydney-based startup called Hullbot. It's got a lovely little underwater drone. It drops into the water. It's got 4 brushes, 7 cameras, various sensors that monitor the hull, and they go and clean the hull. Now, one of the great things about it is that they don't use extreme methods, using brushes rather than anything to scrape the hull. So often you might scrape it too much and start to scrape paint off. These just scrub the hull, but the idea is to do it regularly so you're not trying to get things off that have been attached very well. Now, we sometimes talk about the fact that we have different ways of classifying volume, area, weight, etc.
What's the new standard?
We've got a new
unit for this?
standard now.
Fantastic.
So the
Good. We love this.
size of this autonomous drone is about the size of a case of beer.
Right.
So that's now a new standard for small things about
Gotcha.
the size of a case of beer to be able to get you some idea of what that might look like.
Wow.
So it drops under the water, attaches to the hull, moves along the
cans
hull.
or stubbies? No, that's all right. Keep going.
It did confuse me as well. I started thinking the same thing. Long necks, that'd be much larger than throwdown. So it's about 10 kilograms in mass, and essentially you deploy it from a pod on the ship. Now you can hire companies to do this, or they're probably cheap enough that if you're a ship that was regularly cleaning your hull, you could say, we're just going to have one on board. So each time we come into port, we stop there to get containers unloaded, whatever it might be. We just send it underwater and do a continual
Just
process.
rotate.
Yeah, that's right, continually rotate. Now, one of the things that's a small little bonus, maybe it's not, one of the things they found with it is because it's got a range of sensors that are going along and sensing the hull, making sure there's no cracks and that type of thing, it also is very good at sensing other ship movements around the area.
Oh.
It knows what size those ship movements are. It knows all the size of those ships. So suddenly you've got an underwater drone that cleans your hull and can spy on the ships around you. That was just a benefit, if you want to call it. I'm not sure if benefit's the right word. Another
byproduct of...
sounds better. Yes, a byproduct of the product itself, which maybe that will attract some people who don't really need their hull cleaned that often, but want to know what's going on around underneath them. So that might be maybe more of a case. So they're actually in a fundraising process at the moment because they want to break into Europe and Asia, but in Australia at the moment they're already up and going. They've got hulls being cleaned as we speak by underwater drones, which is all very cool.
Now, we've already talked about accessing the internet from the air, that's in commercial airlines, and how it's fairly impractical. Well, that was all before United Airlines teamed up with Starlink, and now apparently the sky's the limit very soon, Matt.
Oh dear, excuse the puns here.
Ah.
I still find it fascinating, although it's not been a great experience when I've used it. When you're in the sky, you're flying between countries, say, you're doing maybe 900, 950 kilometres an hour. You're not going above the speed of sound in commercial jetliners, but you're going up, getting close there. You're 10 to maybe 12 kilometres above the Earth, and you can sit there and you can use the internet. Now, not great. You're not streaming things. You're not getting great access, but you can still access the internet. Now, the way they've done that in the past is by geostationary satellites, which are sitting 35,786 kilometres above the Earth. So you just imagine you've got one stationary satellite above the Earth and your plane's flying through this, as I said, say 950 kilometres an hour, and it's able to connect to that and give some internet. So even the fact when I've been on a plane, I've gone, it's not great, but wow, what we're doing here is pretty cool. So that's one area. Now, let's go to Starlink. Starlink sits at low Earth orbit, not geostationary. So you're talking about 550 kilometres above the Earth now.
Not too high at all.
And they're going around relative to the Earth at about 27,000 kilometres an hour. So here's this satellite going past 27,000 kilometres an hour. At a spot on the Earth, you might see that in the sky for about 10 minutes, say, at max.
Yeah.
So on a plane now, travelling at 950 kilometres an hour, with this thing above you at 27,000 kilometres an hour, you're connecting to that and getting dramatically better internet service than connecting to a satellite at 36,000 kilometres above the Earth. So it's pretty impressive. You pull all that together.
Extremely impressive, yeah.
And I didn't mind it so much back in the old days when I got on a plane and I'd send an email or set up my out-of-office auto-reply and say, sorry, out of contact for 13 hours, I'm going Sydney to LA, that's it, you won't be able to talk to me for 13 hours. Now I can still be in contact with people and you probably still could make phone calls, but please don't. Please, on the plane, just can you not make the phone call? Just send text messages, send emails, whatever, but the phone call, especially when it's the lovey-dovey saying goodbye to your son that night and hope to see you in the morning and, just spare me, please, while I'm sitting in the plane. But I think it's pretty impressive that you can do all of this. And now with Starlink, they're talking about streaming, so you don't need to download those movies before you get on the plane. You can stream while you're going through. The speed's going to be much better, but it blows my mind. You're on a plane going through the sky at a certain height, and still you're connecting to these low Earth orbit satellites.
Yeah, it's just an amazing thing. Now, I think, with Starlink, you've got a chain of these satellites that are zipping around the Earth. What they do, a lap every hour and a half, I think it is.
Yeah.
So they're moving fast, but I wonder if the signal is more difficult to maintain if you're going with
I was wondering that,
or against it.
That's right. I was wondering the same thing because going against it, you're seeing that satellite for less period of time.
Less. Yeah,
that's right. Going with it, you kind of got a fraction longer.
Chasing it.
But you are chasing or going against them. But you're right, you've got these stream of these satellites. So you're constantly handing off, like you are with your mobile phone when you drive through the streets of Sydney and you're handing off from tower to tower, you're handing off from satellite to satellite. When you're driving your car, though, you're doing 30 or 40 kilometres an hour.
Relative speeds
That's right.
are much less, yeah.
And the cell towers are stationary. These satellites are not stationary and your plane is not stationary. So overall, I do find it absolutely amazing. So from next year, United Airlines are saying they'll have 1,000 planes fitted out with this.
Oh.
I want to go to America just to be able to get on one of these planes and actually just test it out and see how they go. I'm sure that it won't be long before other airlines get on it as well. This is a partnership between United and Starlink at this stage, but I'm sure everyone will go, well, they've got that. We've got to be able to match that
just
service.
makes sense.
And what an easy way for people to be able to get it across oceans, for example, be able to get it in different areas rather than just, sometimes it used to be just on one massive land where you could get that sort of service on a plane, but this will be basically anywhere. Maybe the top end and the bottom of the country, the planet, North and South Pole might be a bit tricky because the satellites are typically going equatorish in between the two tropics, but you might struggle down there, but I can live with that if that's the worst thing that happened.
But there'll be no excuses for being offline.
Well, there goes one of my, I get a rest now for 5 minutes. It's like,
just get to not think about contacting people or have been contacted.
Yeah, that's right. So, and it's funny because back in the old days, I used to still do a few emails and people knew when I landed because they suddenly get bombarded with all these emails synchronising when I landed, but they wouldn't have that anymore. So, but it is quite fascinating.
Now, I'm sure that I saw this next story on some 80s or 90s sci-fi flick back in the day. Was it Demolition Man or Running Man or one of those dystopian movies from the future? We finally have protective paint for cars. It heals itself after scratches, nicks and chips, folks. Mate, I'm convinced Hollywood had a go at this earlier. But this is the real deal.
It's not so much protective paint, protective film.
Right.
So it's a bit like putting just a plastic coating. Remember the old car bras?
Yeah.
You used to see people with these big, black, ugly car bras. There'd be engineers.
Yeah, so people would put that on the front of their cars to protect their cars, but it was the sacrifice of making a car just look really ugly.
Well, it was worse than looking ugly. You had engineers who spent hours getting the coefficient of friction for their car down as low as possible to make it better handling, better efficiency in terms of fuel efficiency,
and then someone chucked this
a big hunk of plastic on the front. So what we've gone to now is a very thin film of plastic over the front. So it's conforming to the shape of the car. So you're not losing any of the aerodynamics that are there, protecting it, but it's actually self-healing as well. And these little bits of film are measured in thicknesses, and it's going to be confusing here, but the thickness they use is
beer
mil.
cuts or something?
No,
No,
well, I thought about that, yeah, but they've gone the other way. They're very small. So these are called mils, MIL. So you kind of think, well, that's just a millimetre. But no, it's not.
Yeah.
1 mil is 0.0254 millimetres.
Has this been developed by an American?
This is a imperial measurement converted to metric. So
This is killing me.
1 mil, 0.0254 millimetres, not very thick, basically. So the typical film thickness is 7 to 11 mils,
Right.
which you would normally think would be 7 to 11 millimetres,
Yeah,
but that would be
it's
too obvious.
not.
Give it
Okay.
another name, please. But 0.18 to 0.28 millimetres. So you can imagine, not very thick. You're not going to notice it on there. It's a clear film on there. And then they've got this very interesting reversible covalent bond elastomeric polymer in the layer of it. So when you've only got a few little layers there, they've got this bond that will respond to heat. So if it gets a scratch, gets a nick, gets a stone chip, whatever, it's protected the paint underneath. And then any heat that's applied to that, you can apply it with a heat gun, a hairdryer, hot water, or the sun. Wow. So you park your car in the sun and these polymers just go, oh, we'll just move around a little bit and fix up that little imperfection that was there so it keeps the protection in place.
Yeah, wow.
So that's cool. Now, I've done for many years, I like to buy new cars on a regular basis and I like to sell them in good condition. So I've put a plastic film across the front of my cars for a long time and it is wonderful. You peel it off at the end and you go, wow, that car looks brand new. But it hasn't been this type of polymer. It's just been same as normal sign writing you might put on a car. It's been that, but it's been clear. So you put it on the front. It did get nicks and scratches. Sometimes I have to replace the film if I had a particularly, sort of gravel-based things I might go through or anything where it did do a bit of damage to it. But it did a really good job protecting the car. And so this is the same, except the film itself is much better in that it'll self-heal, much thinner. Wow. And you take it off the end and people look at it and go, wow, you've never driven this car outside. You've never driven through a bunch of bugs, through a locust plague. It's all there in perfect condition. But isn't it incredible what we're doing with our various substances? This is a real polymer science. I mean, again, looking at different substances, how you develop those, material science, unbelievable. So I can see, I don't actually see new car manufacturers coming out with this because they'd rather you have your car deteriorate a bit more before you trade it back in so they can tidy it up. But I can see an aftermarket market where companies will just be offering this as a service where they'll just say, cover your car in this, it'll protect the value of your car over the life of the car. Yeah, quite fascinating.
Go for it, folks. The recent presidential debate in the US had Trump and his supporters crying foul about being continually pulled up and fact-checked. And fair call too. It's got to be a bit of a pain in the bum when you're regularly caught for spruiking misinformation. But it's a hazard of the job when you're running for office, I suppose. Well, it may just become the norm at parties, around the office cooler, and for the big talkers at the pub on Friday afternoons. Debunkbot, folks. Debunkbot. It's being released with an aim to fact-check the unwary and all in real time. Matt, this thing is going to blow up from being overworked in the next month or so, I would guess.
Well, not the next month or so. It's just happening so much. It's in the next decade it's going to be overworked. And it is fascinating, isn't it? No one like the smart Alex sitting around the pub who actually knew the answers to all the rubbish you were putting out there.
Yeah.
So that was the person who'd say, no, well, actually, that's not correct, James. This is the or who asked you anyway? Because I'm talking here.
or the person who just, they tell some outlandish story, and I've probably done it myself enough times, and you just think, can that really be true?
That's right. I actually had to judge a school debate the other day, and I was doing the marking as you do with all the kids debating, and then they started using some facts in their debate, and I went, wow, that's wrong. That information is so wrong. Yeah. How much do I mark them down? No, it should be up to the other team to actually say, no, that's
their
wrong.
Job.
And they just missed it. They left it alone. So I went, okay, I'm not going to mark them down. Good on them for coming up with something that convinced the other team that it was the way to go.
For making up with it on the spot. Oh,
that's right. Now, what they needed, though, and I'm sure it would have been illegal in a school debate, but Debunkbot is an AI chatbot designed to do one thing and one thing only, and that's to blow the minds of conspiracy theorists. And I'd like to just for the record here, say that we should not call them conspiracy theories because they're not at the level of a theory, hypothesis at best. But it doesn't run off the tongue as well, does it? Conspiracy hypothesis just doesn't have the same ring to it. And probably the people spreading conspiracy theories don't really care about the imperfection of what they're saying by calling them theory. So I've got that off my chest now.
That's all part of the deal.
That's right.
The misunderstanding of the terminology as well.
That's right. Yeah. What the heck? So I'm feeling better now. I'm unloaded with that little part. So the idea of this, and I tried it out. I actually went and gave it some crazy conspiracy theory that I held true, and I went through it, and it gave me some really compelling arguments as to the fact that man did really walk on the moon. So I'm convinced now that man walked on the moon, but it was quite clever the way it went about it. And so they did some testing. They got 2,190 US adults who identified as conspiracy theorists. And essentially, they went through this process, gave them the conspiracy theory, why, they answered a few questions, and then it came back with all the counter-arguments and all the facts that are associated with this various theory they might have held. And what they found by the end of it, 25% of people who participated abandoned their belief entirely. So after hearing the various facts...
because one of the issues with this has been people just denying the correction.
Correct. Yep, that's right.
Choosing what information they are going to believe.
I mentioned it on a previous podcast, but I watched a show one time about flat earthers. And one of the tests they had to prove that the earth was flat was they had a large lake, they had 3 little rafts they'd constructed with 3 posts, and they were shining a laser, and they were going to show that the laser was going on the same spot on each of these posts built. So they're all, say, 1.5 metres above the water, shine it, and of course the laser, they were convinced, was going to go straight, so it would hit the same spot on each post. And it didn't. No. Because the lake curved away. And so then they started saying that obviously the laser wasn't straight. So the thing they were going to use to prove their theory then was suddenly the thing that didn't work in the way they were going to prove their theory. So you're right. People come up with any other idea to say, well, that's obviously not correct there. So for 25% of people to say, you know what, you're right, I'm an idiot.
I've got to give it up.
That's right. 20% of people, an additional 20%, so 25% gave it up. 20% actually weren't as convinced as they were before they started the interaction. Oh, maybe there's something in that, maybe, or not quite convinced there, but that's pretty impressive when you've gone almost half of the people are now starting to go, oh, I'm not going to go spreading this. I might still believe it, but I'm not going to keep talking about it because maybe I'm looking a bit silly at every party. That's why people avoid me at parties, maybe, because I start saying these silly things. So I thought it was quite a clever way to do it.
Keep hearing them whispering, here he comes.
That's right. So it was all based, the Debunkbot was all based around OpenAI's GPT Turbo model, and it was obviously fine-tuned for this particular task. And it was literally a question and answer. I just Googled Debunkbot, D-E-B-U-N-K, so Debunkbot.
So it's all available now.
All available now.
And you can have it sitting on your phone at the pub next time Freddie's talking about the moon landing not happening or flat earth or what have you. And
I actually think one of the reasons it was more convincing was because it wasn't Freddie saying it. Because when you come along and tell your wonderful theories to Freddie and Freddie says, no, you're an idiot, this is how it really was, then I don't think people want to admit that Freddie's right. But when they have an inanimate object, a computer, tell them they're right, maybe they're more prepared to believe that because they don't really have to admit anything to the computer. They can just go away and change their mind a little bit. Yep. Whereas Freddie's going to be onto them. Freddie's going to say, remember what you used to say?
He's going to grind it in.
That's right.
Yeah, right.
So go and have a look at it. If ever you've got, even just giving you some arguments. So when you've got your friend that has some great belief and you want to have all the counter-arguments that are all factual, that aren't just made up, that are based on actual cold, hard data, then go and use Debunkbot and just get some of that information.
So I'm worried, though. I mean, a lot of the problem with AI is that it will search the entire internet, whether or not Debunkbot gets it wrong sometimes.
Well, there were some independent checkers. This is all done by MIT, and they were building this model, if you like. So they actually fact-checked the fact checker, so they were fact checking.
Good.
So they actually found that 99.2% of all the information Debunkbot put forward was absolutely fact checked, was accurate. So yes, there's a potential for that. 0.8% of the things that it said might not have been spot on. So if it gets more information out there and gets more information that's not fact checked, does it start to grow? That's absolutely a risk. But at this stage, it looks like it's not too bad.
Have you ever seen the movie with the train that has no driver? I can't remember the name of it, but of course you have. There's got to be 500 of them, folks. Imagine yourself in that situation, hurtling along a track at 300 kilometres an hour and nobody at the controls. Now, is that disconcerting at all? Matt, that's soon to be the norm, the normal commute, should I say, with the Japanese bullet train. And it's a case of buckle up, folks, and hold on tight.
And if ever they're going to have driverless trains where you're relying on timing of trains, Japan is the spot.
Bingo.
Because you could set your watch. I've been on Shinkansen trains, I've been in Japan, and you could set your watch to the second when that train pulls in and pulls up at that stop and you go, wow, these are accurate. People have left their jobs, people have been fired, people have voluntarily said, don't even worry about firing me, I'm gone because I was the train driver, that train got in a minute late today, and so I'm just not good enough. Obviously, you need to have a better train driver. They are so focused on that. There was a tragedy back around 2005 where one train driver did actually leave a station about a minute late, so he tried to go faster to catch up and actually derailed the train, and about 107 people were killed. So they're very focused on it in Japan in making sure their trains are on time. So if it's going to work anywhere, I reckon that's a pretty good place to start. So the Shinkansen, they're talking about this whole transformation 2027 is their model they're working on. So by the year 2028, there will be driverless Shinkansen trains doing 300 kilometres an hour in Japan with a person sitting in the cockpit.
Oh, there'll be someone there.
There'll be someone there
reading a book
without their hands on the controls, playing Candy Crush, whatever. But just in case something goes wrong, they're there ready. By 2030, they'll be comfortable that person can stay home and play Candy Crush. They don't need to be in the train going along watching what's happening.
Wow.
So it's pretty fascinating. But
you're travelling so fast.
You are. One little tiny mistake, it could be a bit.
Yeah, but if we're there, if we're at that point, I think that's exciting.
It is exciting. One of the things I think that makes a lot of sense is that you've got autonomous vehicles we're working on with cars where you've got so many different things. You've got intersections, you've got pedestrians, you've got other cars. There are so many variables and they're working very hard on that, but still some way away from it. But a train, well, you can't turn left or right. You just have to follow the track. Bingo. You know exactly where you've got to stop at each train station. You haven't got cross traffic to worry about. So it does make sense that we've got working on autonomous trains. In fact, I'm surprised that we haven't got it now because it just seems to make so much sense. Japan does have a problem with an ageing population, so they're trying to work out where they're going to get all their employees from. 1 in 10 Japanese people is over the age of 80, which is quite incredible.
Wow.
So people live a long time in Japan, but they're not driving trains at the age of 80.
No.
And this is part of the problem. They're just not able to get enough staff for all the jobs that need to be done, declining birth rate, a whole range of issues there. But Japan, being a very technology-focused country, believes that one of the ways they'll solve the problems is technology, and I'm all for it. Good on them.
100%.
That's right.
Sports betting is big money these days, but this house of cards may be just about to topple as AI tries its hand at predicting plays in the American NFL competition. Having AI predicting tackles is a big step. Matt, my guess is that this may be the first step in severely altering how sports gambling industry operates. But they had to know that the writing was on the wall, surely.
I wish we would take the technology out of sport. It's just become a bit too clinical now.
Hasn't it?
And I remember hearing an interview about the great Sir Donald Bradman, who was the greatest sports person ever to have lived and possibly ever to live. Apologies to any Americans out there who love their Babe Ruths, but Donald Bradman's stats were so far out of the ballpark, excuse the pun, to Babe Ruth, compared to everyone else with an average of 99.94 with all the over a century of Test cricket played.
Bingo.
No one comes anywhere close to that. So I saw an interview a few years ago and they said, what would happen if Don Bradman was playing now? And the answer was we'd have so much analysis of Don's game, because Don played back in the 30s and 40s, but so much analysis of Don's game that there's no way he would average 99.94 now, because we'd know his exact weaknesses. Now, back when he was playing, people would still say, oh, well, we think he's a bit weak on the leg side, or we might work out a ploy to bowl to him.
Well, he played during that bodyline series, and they brought that in, to combat him, didn't they? Yeah.
Exactly right, to try and stop Don Bradman, and he averaged almost like a normal human in that particular series, but still pretty good. So when you look at all of that, you think there's just nice sometimes in sport that you've just got the X factor. You've got some players who come along and they've got that X factor, but things are analysed to such a level of detail now.
That's right.
More than the players realise themselves. So opposing coaches might say, now make sure when when James has got the ball, he always just looks left before he steps right. James doesn't even know he does that, but opposing coaches know that he does that.
Have you heard the story about Agassi versus Becker?
No.
No. So Boris Becker did this funny little thing with his tongue whenever he was going to serve in a particular way.
Right.
And Boris Becker back in the late 80s, early 90s, he was just defeating people with aces with his incredible serve. But he couldn't get around Agassi. And Agassi worked out this thing about his tongue. He could see the tongue. He knew exactly where he was going to go, so he was able to return serve, right? But Agassi says that the hardest thing for him was to not let on that he'd worked it out. And so he was having dinner with Becker ages later, and Becker just confided, I just could not get it past you.
Yep, there you go.
And Agassi said, well, you know what you did with your tongue? And he had no idea that he did that with his tongue. It was a subconscious thing.
And there you go. So
Yeah.
that's what I mean. Whereas if that was being played now, there'd be people analysing
Yes.
that to the nth degree,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
they would
Yeah.
know what Becker was doing before Becker knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
So here we are now. We get to NFL. Obviously, big money in terms of players, big money in terms of coaches, obviously big money in terms of gambling. But they've now got to the point where this AI system can predict defensive blitzes and tackles in real time. Now, they're saying this is for the viewers, but of course the coaches are going to use it as well. And what they did with this is they trained an AI tool. Only took about 6 months to train it. It used these massive data sets from every NFL game for a 5-year period.
Wow.
So you can imagine all that data,
Yeah.
that current data, and then with
Those
all that,
games go on forever, don't they?
they do go for a long time. A 1 hour game goes for 3 hours. But they did all that, and then they've worked out that here are all these different data points, about 20,000 data points that are happening in real time, using all that information. Oh, there you go, there's going to be a defensive blitz there, or there's going to be a certain tackle made there.
Yeah.
So it just takes, in my mind, some of the variability out of sport. If it becomes too predictable, I mean, I'd almost say with Formula One, I am a Formula One fan, but it gets to the stage now where the drivers are like robots, and it really just comes down to the engineering of that car. Whereas,
And we're talking about the difference in thousandths of a second.
That's right. When you look at some of the old Formula One races, it really was just drivers driving by the seat of their pants, literally, and going and making decisions based on how they felt. Whereas now, no, this corner here, you've got an extra 5 kilometres now, you can hit that corner and your braking point should be there. So it becomes very clinical. So I love sport. I love the variability of sport. But when you start to get to this level, you just do wonder whether it's become a bit too robotic and let the players be players.
Well, yeah. So I said in my introduction that gambling on sports is a big industry, and I'm not going to start weeping for the gambling agencies, but it's going to throw a spanner in the works because there'll be information that is now privy to a lot of people. And that's got to affect the distribution of odds.
Exactly right. And it's also got to make it so that it's much more predictable. One of the things I love about sport is it is unpredictable. That's right. You don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, and frustratingly so sometimes, but
That's right.
rewardingly so in other
That's right.
times.
I mean, it's so unpredictable that the Giants might even win a finals match sometimes. Too soon.
It's too soon.
So I am fascinated with this, and it's going to happen in America first. I think because you've just got so many people watching, so many dollars involved. But what you see in American sport often filters out to all other sports as well. And even at the cricket, if I go and watch a test match now, you'll walk past the dressing room and you'll see 3 or 4 coaches with computers in front of them just analysing so many different parts of the game. So again, I would love the pure side of it. How are you going to go back to that? How are you going to say no more technology? You can't have technology in sport anymore.
Even to the degree of refereeing, and I've lamented this as well. My message to junior sports people is to just play the whistle.
Yep.
And to the parents and the coaches on the sideline, it's about the whistle. Sometimes it blows in your favour and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes things are missed, but that's all part of the game. And trying to appreciate that. But unfortunately, because we've had so much money riding on these the outcomes of these various sports, the pressure on the umpires to get it right, even when we've got the video referees and stuff, and they're getting it wrong. it's just adding more pressure to it. So we just relax the pressure by removing all that and just get the guy with his whistle, in the middle and have a good game, mate.
That's right. Good luck. Go for it. So good luck for us getting back to those glory days.
Yeah, the good old days. There
well,
they are.
It'll just get to the stage where there's robots playing the game, maybe. Who knows? We don't want humans because they make mistakes, damn it.
Well, that's all we have today, folks. As I rummage in the bottom of my bag of words, it appears that all we have left are the crumbs. Thank you, Matthew, for another Sterling Tech Talk.
Well, I want to go now and just grab some AirPods and just see if my hearing is getting to match my birth certificate age, and just maybe I should have something on there because.
What is that?
Yeah, exactly. I can't always hear what my kids say to me, but I think that is selective hearing. I definitely don't always hear what my wife says to me, and that is selective hearing because it's normally another job I've got to do. So maybe I need some AirPods, and maybe I've still got a setting on there that says tune out the kids. Maybe I don't know.
Maybe. Well, I'm off to deck out my living room in photovoltaics. Too much is barely enough, I say. Thanks for tuning in again to Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. It's got more Matthew Dickerson in it than any other tech podcast, so you know it's good. I'm your host, James Eddy, signing off for another episode. Remember, if you're new to TTWMD, you can easily backtrack and catch up on old episodes, although the really old ones with the old new technology, probably not worth it. So if you hear us talking about Sony Walkmans or the latest in VHS video tech, then you've gone way too far. Otherwise, maybe just join us next week for another new episode.